Welcome, brave souls who dare to venture into the darkest corners of human imagination. Imagine walking through a seemingly innocent school hallway, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, the echo of your footsteps bouncing off cold, sterile walls. Now imagine that this ordinary corridor holds secrets so terrifying, so unnaturally twisted, that breaking just one simple rule could cost you everything you hold dear. Think about the places where you feel safest. Perhaps your childhood school, a familiar building, a space where thousands of people have walked before you. What if I told you that some of these places harbor entities that exist in the spaces between reality and nightmare, waiting patiently for someone foolish enough to ignore the warnings that have been whispered for generations? Tonight we're diving deep into one of the most bone-chilling creepypastas ever shared on the internet. A story that will make you question every empty hallway you've ever walked through alone. The tale of Never Break the Hall Rules isn't just another horror story. It's a psychological nightmare that preys on our most primal fears of isolation, the unknown, and the consequences of curiosity. Are you ready to discover what happens when someone decides that rules are meant to be broken? Before we begin this terrifying journey together, I want you to ask yourself, have you ever felt like you were being watched in an empty hallway? Have you ever heard footsteps that weren't your own, echoing behind you? If you've experienced anything like this, you might want to pay very close attention to what I'm about to share with you. Our story begins with Marcus, a 19-year-old college student who stumbled upon something that would forever change his understanding of reality. Picture this. It's 3 a.m, and Marcus is alone in the academic building, cramming for his finals in the dimly lit library. The building, constructed in 1972, has always had an eerie atmosphere after hours, but Marcus had grown comfortable with the solitude. As he made his way through the third-floor hallway toward the bathroom, something caught his attention that he had never noticed before. A small, yellowed piece of paper taped to the wall near the emergency exit. The paper looked old, almost ancient, with edges that seemed to crumble at the slightest touch. When Marcus approached to read it, he discovered a list of rules written in faded ink, titled Hall Rules, 3rd floor East Wing. The handwriting was peculiar, almost childlike, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way certain letters seemed to shift and writhe when he wasn't looking directly at them. The rules were simple enough. Never whistle in the hallway after midnight. Never look behind you if you hear footsteps that aren't your own. Never enter room 307, even if the door's open. Never speak to the woman in the white dress, no matter what she says to you. Never turn off the lights in the hallway. Never stay in the hallway for more than 10 minutes at a time. Marcus laughed initially, thinking it was some elaborate prank left by previous students, but something about the paper's aged appearance and the way it seemed to emanate a subtle coldness made him pause. Have you ever found something that immediately made your skin crawl, even though you couldn't explain why? That's exactly what Marcus experienced as he read those rules for the first time. Human nature, particularly in young adults, often compels us to test boundaries, to push against the limits that others have set. Marcus was no exception to this psychological tendency. The following night, curiosity gnawed at him like a persistent itch that demanded scratching. He found himself returning to the 3rd floor, ostensibly to study, but in reality, he was drawn by an inexplicable need to understand what those rules truly meant. The hallway seemed different somehow, longer, narrower, with shadows that appeared to move independently of their sources. The fluorescent lights buzzed with an intensity that made his teeth ache, and the familiar smell of cleaning supplies was replaced by something metallic and unpleasant. Marcus decided to test the first rule. At exactly 12:15 in the morning, he pursed his lips and released a soft, melodic whistle. The sound echoed strangely in the corridor, seeming to stretch and distort as it bounced off the walls. For a moment, nothing happened, and Marcus felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Then slowly he began to hear it, a whistle responding to his own, but coming from somewhere impossibly far away, as if echoing from the depths of a vast cavern. The responding whistle was slightly off-key, wrong in a way that made his stomach turn. It grew louder, closer, and Marcus realized with growing horror that the sound was coming from behind him. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet seemed rooted to the spot. The whistle continued, now accompanied by what sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps. Marcus finally broke free from his paralysis and ran, not stopping until he reached the safety of his dormitory room. But the sound followed him, echoing in his mind for hours. Can you imagine the terror of realizing that your curiosity has awakened something that should have remained dormant? What would you have done in Marcus's position? Despite his terrifying experience, Marcus found himself drawn back to the third floor like a moth to flame. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings, but something deeper, more primal, compelled him to return. Sleep had become elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that distorted whistle echoing in his dreams. 3 days later, armed with a digital camera and a voice recorder, Marcus decided to document whatever was happening in that cursed hallway. This time, he broke the second rule. As he walked slowly down the corridor, he began to hear footsteps behind him, not his own but lighter, more deliberate, as if someone was trying to match his pace while remaining undetected. The rules had specifically warned against looking behind him, but the temptation was overwhelming. Marcus stopped walking and slowly turned around. The hallway stretched empty behind him, but the footsteps continued for 3 more beats before falling silent. The temperature in the corridor dropped noticeably, and Marcus's breath began to fog in the suddenly frigid air. Then he saw her, a woman in a white dress standing at the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. She was too far away to make out clearly, but something about her posture suggested she was watching him intently. Marcus raised his camera and took a photo, the flash illuminating the entire corridor for a split second. When his vision cleared, the woman was gone, but the feeling of being watched had intensified tenfold. Later, when Marcus reviewed the photograph, he discovered something that chilled him to the bone. The woman was still there in the image, but she was much closer than she had appeared to the naked eye, and her face was a blur of features that seemed to shift and change each time he looked at them. What's more terrifying? Seeing something supernatural with your own eyes, or discovering that your camera has captured something even more disturbing than what you remember? The third rule had explicitly forbidden entering room 307, and Marcus had noticed that the door to this room was indeed always open, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness beyond the threshold. During his research into the building's history, Marcus discovered that room 307 had been sealed off in 1989, following a series of unexplained incidents involving students who had entered the room and emerged hours later with no memory of their experience, but exhibiting signs of severe psychological trauma. The Dewey official records were sparse, but Marcus managed to track down Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a retired psychology professor who had been involved in treating some of the affected students. Dr. Hartwell was initially reluctant to discuss the incidents, but eventually revealed that the students had all reported the same recurring nightmare, being trapped in an endless room filled with mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of themselves experiencing various forms of suffering. What made these cases particularly disturbing was that the students continued to experience these nightmares even while awake, unable to distinguish between their reflection and reality. Despite this knowledge, or perhaps because of it, Marcus felt an irresistible urge to enter room 307. The darkness beyond the doorway seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, and occasionally Marcus thought he could hear whispers emanating from within. On his 5th visit to the 3rd floor, the compulsion became too strong to resist. Marcus stepped across the threshold into room 307, immediately feeling the temperature drop to near freezing levels. The room was indeed filled with mirrors, just as Dr. Hartwell had described, but these weren't ordinary mirrors. Each reflection showed Marcus in different stages of decay, aging, and death. In one mirror, he saw himself as an elderly man, withered and alone. In another, he appeared to be screaming silently, his mouth open in perpetual agony. The most disturbing mirror showed him exactly as he was, but with eyes that held an intelligence that wasn't his own. Have you ever looked in a mirror and felt like something else was looking back? The 4th rule had been the most specific. Never speak to the woman in the white dress, no matter what she says to you. Marcus had already seen her twice, always at a distance, always watching. But on his 7th visit to the 3rd floor, she was waiting for him directly in the center of the hallway, close enough that he could see her face clearly for the first time. She was beautiful in an unsettling way, with features that seemed too perfect, too symmetrical, as if she had been crafted rather than born. Her white dress appeared to be from another era, perhaps the 1940s or 50s, and it seemed to glow with its own internal light. When she spoke, Her voice was like honey mixed with broken glass, simultaneously soothing and painful to hear. "You've been reading the rules," she said, her lips barely moving. "Do you understand why they exist?" Marcus remembered the warning, but the temptation to respond was overwhelming. Every fiber of his being wanted to engage with her, to ask the questions that had been burning in his mind for days. "I know you want to ask me about this place," she continued, taking a step closer. "I know you want to understand what happened here, why the rules were created. I can show you everything, Marcus. I can show you the truth about what lies beyond the boundaries of your world." The way she said his name sent chills down his spine. He had never told her his name, and there was no way she could have known it. Marcus clenched his fists, digging his nails into his palms to maintain focus, and forced himself to walk past her without responding. As he passed, she whispered something that made his blood freeze. "You can't ignore me forever, Marcus. Soon, you'll have to choose between your curiosity and your sanity." The encounter left, Marcus shaken but determined to uncover the truth behind the rules. Little did he know that his continued defiance was drawing the attention of something far more dangerous than the woman in white. By his 10th visit to the 3rd floor, Marcus had become obsessed with understanding the supernatural forces at work in the hallway. His grades were suffering, his relationships were deteriorating, and he had lost nearly 15 pounds due to lack of appetite and sleep. The rules had become his nemesis, each one representing a barrier between him and the truth he desperately sought. On what would become his final visit, Marcus decided to break every remaining rule simultaneously. He turned off the lights in the hallway, plunging the corridor into complete darkness except for the emergency exit signs that cast an eerie red glow. He had been in the hallway for over 30 minutes, far exceeding the 10-minute limit specified in the final rule. The darkness seemed alive, writhing and pulsing around him like a living entity. Marcus could hear movement in the shadows, whispers in languages he didn't recognize, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The woman in white materialized before him, but now she was different. Her perfect features were twisted with rage, and her white dress was stained with what appeared to be blood. "You foolish boy," she hissed, her voice now layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. "The rules weren't meant to protect you from us. They were meant to protect us from you." Marcus realized with growing horror that his violations had been feeding something, strengthening it with each transgression. The hallway began to stretch and distort around him, walls bending at impossible angles, the ceiling seeming to rise into infinite darkness. Other figures began to emerge from the shadows, previous students who had broken the rules, their faces twisted with the same madness that Marcus now felt creeping into his own mind. They reached out to him with grasping fingers, their mouths moving in silent screams. The woman in white stepped closer, her form now flickering between beauty and something far more sinister. "Welcome to your new reality, Marcus," she whispered as the darkness consumed him completely. "What happens when we ignore the warnings that others have died to give us?" Marcus was found 3 days later by campus security, unconscious in room 307 with no memory of how he had gotten there. The official report stated that he had suffered a severe psychological breakdown due to academic stress, but those who knew him recognized that something far more sinister had occurred. Marcus spent the next 6 months in a psychiatric facility, where he would often be found standing in front of mirrors, carrying on conversations with his reflection. The doctors noted that he seemed to believe he was still in the hallway, still bound by rules that only he could see. When Marcus was finally released, he was a changed man, quiet, withdrawn, and possessed of a haunting knowledge that he could never fully articulate. He would sometimes warn other students about the 3rd floor, but his words were dismissed as the ramblings of someone who had suffered a mental breakdown. The rules on the yellowed paper disappeared shortly after Marcus's incident, but new ones appeared periodically, written in different handwriting but containing similar warnings. Some say that Marcus himself writes them, compelled by his experience to try to protect others from the same fate. Others believe that the entities in the hallway use him as a conduit, ensuring that new victims will be drawn to test the boundaries just as he did. The truth, as is often the case with the supernatural, remains elusive and terrifying. Campus legends speak of students who have encountered Marcus in the hallway late at night, warning them about the rules, his eyes holding a depth of knowledge that no human should possess. He speaks of the woman in white as if she were an old friend, and sometimes, if you listen carefully, You can hear him whistling a tune that seems to echo from impossible distances. The building still stands, the third floor still accessible to those brave or foolish enough to venture there after midnight. New students arrive each semester, and inevitably, some of them discover the rules. The cycle continues, fed by human curiosity and the irresistible urge to test the boundaries of the unknown. So, I ask you, dear viewers, as we reach the end of this terrifying tale, would you have been able to resist the temptation to break the rules? Would you have heeded the warnings? Or would your curiosity have led you down the same dark path as Marcus?